Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to... I'm so sorry about this, guys. Could this be...
Hello, Freestyle.
You again? What do you want?
Yes, it's me. I'm gonna get you this time. Who directed the original Hills of Eyes?
Wes Craven.
Who's the killer in Psycho?
Norman Bates.
Friday 13 creator.
Sean S. Cunningham. I hung up again. You know what? I'm gonna block his ass. Scream 3 was directed by Wes Craven and stars Neve Campbell, David Arquette, and Courteney Cox. And the story follows Sidney Prescott, who now is a reclusive living in California as a new string of murders starts piling up, centering around a horror film that's in production in Hollywood. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to my Scream film series review. I've reviewed the first two, which I'll have in the link below, and I'm going to review every Scream movie leading up to the new one, followed by a ranking sometime the week after that. Of course, minus the TV show. So as you all know, I've ranted about this before, I'm somebody that has always held this series close and near and dear to my heart. Without these movies, there will be no horror in my life. There wouldn't be any form of horror art in my life. If it wasn't for these, none of the others that I followed shortly thereof wouldn't even exist to me. I truly do believe that. I know I sound like I'm over-exaggerating here, but I truly do believe that. So I've always been somebody who's held these movies up on a pedestal. I owe everything to Ghostface. So by the time the second film came out, that's when I started getting into them. So I was very early to the game. 3 has not donned the big screen by the time I started getting into them. Like I said, it was shortly after the second one came out. I believe it came out on VHS by the time I seen the first one. Scream 3 was actually the first horror movie I ever experienced in theaters. Scream 3 was the first one I actually gone to see in theaters. Of course, I went with my father because I was still young at the time. This was the year 2000. So, yeah, this was the first horror film I have ever watched in theaters. And it was a great theater experience. I think that was actually the time that actually got me into loving the theater experience, to be honest. And I'm somebody that's always put Scream 3 up on top. But over the years, it has been 22 years later. So over time, of course, things will change, but not for the absolute worst. 22 years and 1 billion views later, of course, opinions have changed. But before I get into any of that, without further ado, let's get into the positives of Scream 3. I like the whole stab subplot, where you have a movie within a movie. It kind of keeps that meta reference alive, but I'll get into why I have a problem with that later on. But I like that whole subplot thing, where you have the characters in this movie that's actually in Hollywood, and everything that's going on is based around a movie within this movie that's being made called Stab, which was actually brought up in the second one at the beginning of 2. Basically, you have Hollywood producing this movie in Scream 3 in this movie, where it's actually like based on true events, which is what this Stab subplot is. They're making a movie based on the events in this movie, if that makes any sense. And that was nice. It brought sort of a real life vibe, real life establishment to it. Like the characters in this movie was watching something and anticipating something based on what actually happened in these films, in the original particularly. Which made the setting, the whole Hollywood backdrop, it really did work for me. And it all worked for the side plot where you hear about Sidney's mother's murder in the first 2, and then they really elaborate it in this one, in Scream 3. Which, it fits in perfectly with the Hollywood setting because you find out more who this woman was before her murder, like 2 years prior, I believe that said. And like it even goes back further, not visually, but in context of who this woman was even back in the 70s. So you get a little context there, and you get a little more of an understanding of who this woman was, who Maureen Prescott was, which really made the killer's motivation stand out. It came all into focus and it made much more sense. It connected the dots really good by the third act. This was actually not the story they originally intended to tell. For whatever reason, whether it was creative differences between studio execs or just plain direction change, it still fared good enough. And of course, the cast was great. You got returning stars Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott, David Arquette as Dewey Riley, and Courteney Cox as Gail Weathers. I won't rant as much on them in this because I've already stated my feelings as deep as I could in the first two reviews, and nothing has really changed, but not in a bad way. I won't be talking much about them except for Dewey, which I really do feel sorry for him, in terms of the first two. I didn't really elaborate on this, but the dude's indestructible. They put him through the ringer. He was stabbed in the back in the first, and pretty much stabbed in the same area in the back in the second one. And it made it look like he actually died, but he pulled through each time. Luckily, they didn't do that with him in this one. But dude's been through the ringer, and he's pretty much indestructible. And I didn't really mention this in the first two film reviews. Roger L. Jackson, who plays the killer's voice. You don't see this guy, but you hear his voice, and you get the chills. Every time when he calls somebody up, when the killer calls somebody up, you just get the chills. This guy had a voice built for this part.
Just one question. Do you think it's over, Sidney? Do you?
It's one of the several things that annoy me in the series. I won't get too much into that because he wasn't in those. But every time he calls up somebody in these movies, you just get a chill down your spine. He was born to play that part, to voice this role. As mentioned before, growing up, I put this one as my top favorite. Mostly because, again, this was the first horror film that I've ever experienced in theaters. Maybe that's why I was still young. But over the years, things have changed. As I said, 22 years and 1 billion views later, things change. So let's dive into the negatives. The writing. Unlike the first two, which was written by Kevin Williamson, Ehren Kruger took over writing duties from Kevin Williamson. I don't know why they didn't choose to bring Kevin Williamson back. Maybe it was because of that other movie he was doing, Teaching Mrs. Tingles, which I believe came out around the same time. I might be wrong on that, but there's had to have been some reason why they didn't bring Kevin Williamson back for Scream 3. But it definitely shows, mostly because of the meta reference lack thereof, which really doesn't make sense because you have this movie based on a movie that's being made in Hollywood, yet you have no references to any other movies. But you have the movie set in Hollywood where a movie is being made within this movie, but you have no other references. That, to me, didn't really make sense. And because of that, the smartness and the brilliance of the first two that Kevin Williamson brought to the table, you don't see at all in Scream 3. Not that I'm dogging Ehren Kruger. I think he's a good writer. It's just they could have brought in somebody else. They could bring in Kevin Williamson. They could have brought in someone else who was probably a little more familiar with Williamson's work, unlike Ehren Kruger, who just lacked a certain magic that the first two brought because of that. And the killer reveal didn't really make that much sense to me either. Now, I can't really talk about this without revealing the killer, so spoiler alert. But Scott Foley, who played Ronan, you see a scene where they go down in the basement and Courteney Cox's character comes across the body of Scott Foley's character. You see him lying there in that fake coffin with blood everywhere, with the knife in his chest, and you even see Courteney Cox check his pulse, which confirms that he was dead, yet later on you find out he's the killer. So that didn't really make sense to me. Maybe that has something to do with the 3 different endings that Wes Craven tried to do to prevent the big reveal. Because that's one thing that these movies were hard on doing, because around this time the internet was just getting off the ground, and there was certain things that people had to work harder at to keep certain things off the internet, because, the way people blab, kind of like how I am now. There's 3 different endings that he had to write to keep the actual one off. So maybe that's the reason why. But in the end, it just didn't really make that much sense to me. Yet the motive was clear. The motive was good enough. But it's just the whole big reveal after seeing that scene didn't really work for me. And the lack of gore. There wasn't much blood and gore in that. This series, especially the first 3 of these, I guess because of the times that they came out, they were a victim of the time that they came out. There wasn't really never known to have that much blood and gore. Compared to now, like they upped it 10 times in the stuff that they show now compared to then. Maybe I'm being a little too unfair, but still, I wasn't going to mention this because I've pretty much dragged it to the ground in the first 2 films reviews, but we got another clumsy killer when he's in this full mask and his full costume and everything. But the only reason why I mentioned it this time, I don't think I'll mention it again, but the only reason why I mentioned it is because one particular shot did kind of make me laugh. After Sidney was getting ready to fire at Ghostface at the end, he's like, "Come get me." And then he starts chasing her. There's this glass window that was behind her. He starts lunging after her, and he just crashes into the window, and that got a definite giggle out of me. And then he started chasing after her, and it's like this killer is just indestructible himself. So it's like no matter what he does, he trips, he falls into the glass windows. He just keeps on trucking. So despite all that, Scream 3 is still a top-notch thrill ride and a bona fide slasher. So if you're expecting to see the same brilliance and on-the-nose meta genius the first 2 brought, please lower your expectations. However, for slasher fans alone, you'll still have a good time, even if it's on the fence. Scream 3, what was your thoughts? Was this in your top favorite of the Scream series, or was this the weakest to you on the Scream chain? Write me down your comment and give me your thoughts. Thank you so much, guys, for watching this video. Like, subscribe, comment, and share, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.